Tom Brady has officially retired from the National Football League, and we'd be remiss not to talk about our favorite and least favorite Broncos memories involving Tom Brady. Plus, we look ahead to the future. Could a Bronco and a former New England Patriot reunite in a project? We talk about that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome back into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, and joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. Both of us, we cover the Denver Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Once again, Broncos Country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you listen to your podcast. Not to mention, you can watch us here on YouTube, on your TV, on your smartphone, or your computer. YouTube, Locked on Broncos. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage all year long. Because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. Sayre, my friend, hey, it's great to be joined by you here once again on another episode of Locked on Broncos. You know, outside of the slow news cycle right now for the Denver Broncos, some relevant NFL-worthy news as Tom Brady has officially announced his retirement from the National Football League. And so today I feel like we'd be really remiss not to talk about our favorite Broncos memories versus Tom Brady's and some of the painful ones that Broncos Country experienced because of Tom Brady, and a little bit of a look ahead about something maybe he and Peyton Manning might be involved with in the future.
Absolutely. I'm still pinching myself over here trying to determine whether or not this is real. Like, I didn't know if I would ever see the day that Tom Brady retires from the NFL. We've been talking about it for like 10 years, I feel like. So, man, it's just crazy. 22 years in the NFL, playing to the age of 44, like that's pretty insane. I mean, for him to be able to do that. So hats off to Tom Brady. I know we've had plenty of battles through the years, and we've had memes and all these different things created about how much we hate Tom Brady. But I feel like if anyone's ever seen the movie Anchorman, it's kind of like Tom Brady is Ron Burgundy and like we're Wes Mantooth. It's like, I hate you, but I respect you, you know, type of thing. So it's crazy to see that he's finally retiring from the NFL. Just nuts. We'll see. Maybe, I don't know. Could we have a Brett Favre situation on our hands here, Cody? I don't know. Can Tom Brady really put away the cleats?
Who knows? That's the question of the century here right now, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, I think one thing to kind of keep a look at here when it goes to this whole Tom Brady situation, I think it's a sad moment for the NFL just because of the fact that when we look back at our era, you know, Sayre, when I was younger, when I was a kid, a teenager, we had the Peyton Mannings, we had the Eli Mannings, the Tom Bradys, the Drew Brees. All those quarterbacks are gone now, Sayre. They are no longer in the NFL. So it's like, it's a sad time. It's kind of like a passing of the torch to the next generation of quarterbacks. And hopefully the Broncos can find a guy in the future that could carry that torch as well for a significant time for the franchise there. But I think for the most part, Broncos Country has re-embraced Tom Brady with open arms since becoming a Buccaneer. He's done a lot of good things to help the Denver Broncos in some ways. We'll talk about that a little bit. Let's get to some of our favorite memories. Remember the times that the Denver Broncos bested Tom Brady. Sayre, I think the number one thing that we're always going to go back to, it's going to be at the top of every Broncos fans list, the 2015 AFC Championship game, Manning versus Brady, once again for the final time ever, and it delivered in spectacular fashion, a dominant Broncos defensive performance, but then again, Tom Brady rallying his team back, and all of a sudden just the drama and the suspense there. Broncos coming out on top. I'll just never forget that game, really, for Von Miller, and he's going to be playing in Super Bowl 56, luckily here for him, dropping back into coverage against Gronkowski, getting an interception, the sacks that he had in that game, just his dominant postseason run, and that came at the expense of Tom Brady being able to try to get to another Super Bowl. Von Miller was an obstacle in getting away from that. What's another fond memory that you feel like Broncos Country should touch on here as we remember Tom Brady? Some of the best moments the Broncos have experienced against him.
Oh, man, that's a tough one to top. Didn't the Broncos get the Patriots O-line coach fired for hitting Tom Brady so much in that game after that was a great one.
So.
A couple years before that, though, Cody, obviously the Broncos winning that AFC Championship game in 2013 to get to the Super Bowl, I hold that memory in super high regard. Number one, because I feel like obviously everybody remembers the Terrence Knighton, sacking Tom Brady and stuff from that game, but like there were so many injuries on that Denver Broncos defense at that point, and so it kind of just felt going into that game like, oh, great, we got to beat Tom Brady without our best players on defense. No Von Miller, no Chris Harris. I believe he tore his ACL just the week prior to that. So injuries all over the place, and you had I think the safeties at that time were like Josh Bush and just random guys
I
all
think it
over
was
the place.
Dookie and Nacho was another one
Dookie
too.
Inacho, yeah. Yeah, so shout out to those guys. Hey, if you listen to the show, you're part of one of the best memories. So the 2013 AFC Championship game, just beating Brady and I felt like that game, like the Broncos kind of dominated that game. The 2015 version of the AFC Championship game, the Broncos let the Patriots back in. The 2013 game, it was kind of just like easy watching over the course of the game. The Broncos kind of kicked their butts. So I feel like that's a great one. And that's not the only playoff memory I think that really stands out to me, Cody. I know. How old were you when this one happened, Cody? 2005, Broncos handing Tom Brady his first playoff loss.
I was 11 years old, Sayre. 11 years
Man.
old. And I remember that game specifically. Obviously a good friend of the
Mhm.
show, Nick Ferguson, pressures Tom Brady on a blitz. He throws it. Champ Bailey intercepts it, runs it 99 yards back, thinks that he's got clear run for a touchdown. Ben Watson comes out of nowhere, blasts him. The ball goes out of bounds at the 1 yard line. But Jake Plummer, that Broncos team that year in 2005, Sayre, was a special team. One of the best teams, in my opinion, in NFL, in Broncos franchise history to never win a Super Bowl. The AFC Championship game they lost to the Steelers was a heartbreaker, but that interception moment was there. And really coming into that game, I just remember watching that again. And it's also on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to go back and try to find it, go and search for it. But just Tom Brady was just jawing at the Broncos the entire time. That's the one thing that Broncos country didn't like about Tom, was just the trash talk and just how angry and entitled he would sound. Like John Lynch blasted him a few times, and they were having a good jawing session back and forth there. But the 2005 one is a good memory. But we'd be remiss as well, really, not to talk about one moment, because I think in 2009, when the Broncos had a brand new head coach and Josh McDaniels, yes, I know, a very horrific time in Broncos country. However, there was a moment there in that season, the 2009 season, where the Broncos once again bested Tom Brady. And it was when Josh McDaniels took on his former disciple and Bill Belichick.
Yeah, that was really, really satisfying, right? Because it kind of just vindicated, like for a moment at least, all those decisions that Josh McDaniels had made that were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe what he's trading Jay Cutler. He's doing this, he's doing that.
Yeah.
And then you have the Patriots coming to town. You're wearing those stupid yellow and brown uniforms, and the Patriots, on the other hand, are wearing like the coolest uniforms ever that they've had in their franchise history. And it's like just this. It was such a crazy time. But all the changes that the Broncos had made, that Josh McDaniels gets to beat Bill Belichick in Denver and Tom Brady in Denver, which at that time, like, that rivalry was still pretty hot. Like Tom Brady, I think, had gone on a little bit of a hot streak against the Broncos. So for them to win that game was important at the time. And it was, you'll never forget Josh McDaniels just whipping his fist through
Yep.
the air as he ran off the field. I imagine Bill Belichick still has some good laughs about that to this day. But man, that was a good one. And not to mention, the overtime thriller with Brock Osweiler at QB. We're flashing forward a few years here, but that was a fun one too.
It was the snow game, and it was chilly, just pouring down sideways. Everything was frozen, but this was the overtime thriller. C.J. Anderson off the left side. This was a game that just featured this back and forth, because the Broncos, they got themselves down early. Tom Brady, in the red zone, was just picking the Broncos apart, and they were really having some success. Brock Osweiler, the run game was going. They were able to get some stops defensively. They were. And then I just remember in overtime, Shaq Barrett coming up with a big time play to be able to give the Broncos a chance to have some play. Actually, it wasn't overtime. It was in the fourth quarter, a big time sack that took them kind of out of range to kick a field goal that would have, I think, given them the lead, if I'm not mistaken. But then all of a sudden, C.J. Anderson left side, overtime walk-off. That was huge, because really that stretch for the Broncos there, without Peyton Manning, they needed to win games. Like we talk about the Week 17 game where they come in against Phillip Rivers. The Broncos, if they would have lost that, they would have dropped out of the first seed, potentially out of the playoffs, even though they had a really good record. That's how crazy it was that season was kind of very Hollywood ending there for the Denver Broncos. But one more thing as well. I think last year for Broncos country, everybody was hoping for Tampa Bay. Broncos country was rooting for Tampa Bay, and they delivered, and they defeated the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So, Sayre, obviously Tom Brady, there's been a lot of good memories for the Denver Broncos against Tom Brady. He provided us with all one last year, defeating Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, prohibiting them from being able to win a Super Bowl. And obviously, you can go back to 2018 AFC Championship game, obviously beating the Chiefs again there. But, Tom Brady is officially retired, ladies and gentlemen. And coming up here here in just a moment. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we're going to talk about some of the times that Tom Brady, he hurt our soul to our very core in Broncos country. We talk about that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our good friends over there, betonline.net. And there might be less football being played, but betonline.net has way more odds and info for this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business, from sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline is your number one online wagering destination. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and play your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so as we jump into the second half action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, going through remembering Tom Brady's presence and impact in the NFL. From a Broncos perspective here, obviously the game is changing. We touched on a little bit in the last segment, just the NFL quarterback generations that we grew up seeing, Sayre, that dominated the Sundays, the Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, just the prolific names there. I just feel sad right now just because that is now gone. Now, granted, Tom Brady wanted to outlast everybody. I do remember there was a little bit of controversy, right? So now we're going to focus on the times that Tom Brady has hurt us. I remember when some of his emails had leaked out and some of the things he was saying about Peyton Manning. That right there, I get where Tom has come from. Obviously, they're really good friends in real life, but, in competitive nature, competitive spirit, I think it rubbed Broncos country the wrong way with how he said it, like, I'm gonna play longer than that dude, and I think it was kind of like, oh, okay, this is a big chip on your shoulder. And obviously that led to a lot of really good stuff for the AFC Championship game in 2015 that we just talked about. But there's been a lot of times, Sayre, that Tom Brady has hurt Broncos country deep to the core. And I'd be remiss if we don't start off with probably one of the more recent memory ones, and that goes back to the 2011 playoffs. This is a week after the Denver Broncos walk off at Empire Field at Mile High. Well, it was Mile High Stadium at the time. Demaryius Thomas walk-off touchdown in the wild card round against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then they have to go play the New England Patriots, who they played in the regular season that same very year, and they got destroyed. There's the same result here in the playoffs. You had Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski just destroying, and then obviously the rise of Julian Edelman. But this was just a game that was just jarring back and forth, but the Broncos just got smacked. And unfortunately, those playoff hopes kind of dwindled against the Patriots.
They did. And you're right. That loss in the playoffs in particular was kind of heartbreaking, but like everybody still remembers the Steelers game. So I don't know. It's kind of, they didn't necessarily win the Super Bowl that year, but they did beat the reigning Super Bowl champions in the most dramatic fashion that we've probably ever seen as Broncos fans. So it was bittersweet, but at the same time, like that earlier loss that you referenced, that 2011 regular season loss against the Patriots, the Broncos led that game 17-0 in Foxborough with Tim Tebow at QB, and then they ended up winning like 40-something to 20-something. I can't remember exactly the final score, but it was a blowout in the second half of that game. But 17-0 lead, that was tough. And then the 2013 regular season loss, Cody, just one of the most brutal, because at this point, like with Peyton Manning in 2013, everybody's expecting a victory every single week. Like, yes. I know a lot of times we joke about, going 17-0 until we ain't, but like Broncos country in 2013 was like, we are winning every freaking game this season. I don't care. And to lose like they did in Foxborough, once again, Peyton Manning's kryptonite, and you have a 24-0 lead at halftime. Everybody's getting their drinks and their snacks and thinking like, man, this is great. We got the number one offense in the league. We just coast to a win. But man, Tom Brady had other plans. And I know the Broncos clawed back after the Patriots took a lead in the fourth quarter of that game. Then the Broncos had to fire back and score again just to get the game to overtime, only to have the win knocked out of their sails again in overtime with a game-winning field goal. So, and it was even more hurtful, I feel, Cody, because Wes Welker had joined the Broncos that offseason. And like, we just thought, man, we got all these pieces to finally beat Tom Brady. Like, it was less about the Super Bowl or who we would play in the NFC and more about, hey, how can we get past Tom F. Brady, and that was just disheartening. It felt like, man, like we're going to have to see them again. And now you've lost to them in the regular season. So you're not going to be able to beat them for playoff seeding. And man, that was a heartbreaking loss. I remember that night just being devastated. Like, man, this is like almost like felt like, well, screw the rest of this season. We're not going to be able to beat them next time we see them. So that was one of the toughest for me, I feel like.
Well, it was very vindicating, right? Because we mentioned, you lose in the regular season there. Playoff seeding is super important. Now, luckily, New England lost a couple of games down the stretch. They kind of bounced them out. The Broncos had home field advantage in the playoffs that season. Obviously, a very dominant season from an offensive standpoint. But you mentioned having a 24-0 lead at halftime. And really, before halftime, Von Miller had the scoop and score fumble return for a touchdown. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh my goodness, the Broncos marched into Tom Brady's house and they are kicking the door down. And then all of a sudden, they come storming back, which for Tom Brady, look, we've seen that all throughout his career. I mean, we even saw it against the LA Rams in the divisional round too, coming back from a 27-3 deficit against the Rams. And unfortunately, they couldn't stop Cooper Kupp in terms of coverage on the defensive side of the ball. But going back, it's like, okay, now it kind of makes you less optimistic, right? Because when you face a team once, or if you lose to them, you're like, oh my goodness, that's demoralizing. But Denver came out and they got vindication. Obviously, in the playoffs, they dominant win for the AFC Championship game to go into the Super Bowl that we no longer talk about. That Super Bowl is no longer in our memory. We forget about it. Never happened. And, I think it was just one of those moments, just a surreal season for the Broncos there. But yes, Tom Brady playing spoils in the regular season. And guess what? It came on Sunday Night Football, primetime action. Well, that hurts a little bit more because then all the talking heads all week long, like, oh yeah, the Denver Broncos aren't for real. Tom Brady's the GOAT, all that stuff. I remember it because I was in high school. I was a junior in high school at the time. And I remember all that talk. And I was like, I'm staying off. I'm not watching ESPN. I'm not watching First Take. None of that BS all week long. So there is that. But most recent memory, I would say that Tom Brady hasn't really hurt the Denver Broncos in a sense. But last year, the Broncos took on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Denver in week 3. And they came out victorious. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did. The Denver Broncos didn't. And this was the Jeff Driscoll game where he was just getting sacked left and right. We saw Brett Rippon come in the fourth quarter, deliver some passes, and give the Broncos a little bit of a spark. But it was a little too late. And Tom Brady didn't necessarily do anything to hurt the Broncos outside of a pass to O.J. Howard down the right sideline on a wheel route. And then he had Mike Evans had 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, ridiculous. There were like screenplays on the red zone there. And I just remember that game. The Broncos, they just came out flat and they couldn't recover. They made some momentum in the second half, but a field position killed them in that game. That was really about it in terms of where Tom Brady has hurt the Denver Broncos. So I'd say outside of that, Sayre, the memories for Broncos country for the most part are very fond because Tom Brady didn't have a lot of success against the Denver Broncos in his time as a New England Patriot. So with that, I'd say that we can now remember it. Now we're going to get to the question coming up here in just a moment. How could a potential New England Patriot, Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and former Denver Bronco be involved in a project together? Maybe in the future. I throw out a very interesting idea coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, folks, let me tell you about the other sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. It's our good friends over there at Built Bar. Ladies and gentlemen, you know it is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. The best tasting and also the healthiest protein bar. Ladies and gentlemen, the bars are covered in 100% milk chocolate. And when you take a bite into them, they are soft and they are easy to chew. And you can check out the 9 amazing, delicious flavors, including the occasional limited time flavor that goes on a monthly basis at built.com. Find a flavor for you or your family, or you can get a mixed box of all the flavors to figure out which one you love the most. And if you need a little bit of extra fuel to help you get yourself through the day, Built Bar contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. Ladies and gentlemen, that is tremendous value for something that's covered in 100% milk chocolate. Not to mention, you can go to built.com right now. When you go to checkout, ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and enter promo code LOCKED15. That'll get you 15% off your next order at built.com. Once again, promo code LOCKED15 gets you 15% off at built.com. As we jump into the fourth quarter on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, a Broncos Country special, remembering all the good and bad times against Tom Brady as he announces his retirement. Wanted to throw out a little bit of an idea here, Sayre, that I feel like I put a tweet out on Twitter, and Broncos Country, for the most part, I worded it along the lines, Broncos Country, now that Tom Brady has retired, how do you feel? Is he still a villain to Broncos Country, or have you accepted him with open arms? And everybody, for the most part, the common response that I received was, when he left New England, we started to love Tom Brady because we got to see a different personality, a different side to him, a guy that literally at the Super Bowl party, at a parade, is drunk and is having a good time. Like, he was just carefree, laid back, and he was fun to actually watch. And I think that was a very interesting perspective, right? Because when you're playing against a guy, a part of a fan base for all these years inside your conference, and he's no longer there to really impact you, it's like, hey, okay, hey, best of luck to that guy. I think Broncos country is very accepting of Tom Brady, but we've seen Tom Brady and Peyton Manning get even more close, though, Sayre. They do a lot of things. They have a lot of fun gags together. And when Tom Brady retired, Peyton Manning put out his official, like, thank you and, like, congratulations to Tom. And when I was reading Peyton's, text and image of what he had sent over about Tom Brady, I literally read it in his voice. Like, when you look at it, you can just hear you can hear Peyton Manning's voice. So a little fun exercise for Broncos country to go and try to conduct there. But I want to know your thoughts on this. I believe that as we see, especially with the Manning cast that we see with Eli and Peyton, do you think that they will add another guy here in the near future named Tom Brady? I feel like he'd be the perfect addition. Those three guys sitting down, trading barbs, talk football. Because look, Tom Brady appeared already this season on the Manning cast, and I think that adding those three together would be must-see TV. But I had put a tweet out just about a couple of years ago. I said, hey, in 5 years, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, they'll be calling Monday Night Football. It may not be 5 years. It could be sooner than that. But, it was nice to kind of be in the ballpark there. What would your thoughts be on seeing Tom Brady and Peyton Manning do stuff together?
Oh man, that would just be a blast. I mean, if you're a football fan, if you're a comedy fan, like those two things meshing together, those two worlds coming together right there, especially when you add Eli to the mix, because he's sitting over there like you've got Peyton and Brady, who are like two of the greatest quarterbacks literally ever, maybe the two greatest quarterbacks ever. And then you've got Eli over there who's got like big time bragging rights over Tom Brady for forever. I mean, he beat him in the Super Bowl twice. So I think that would be so much fun to watch. I think let's manifest it, man. I'm ready. I would watch every Monday Night Football broadcast with those guys on it. So I think it would be a lot of fun. And I agree with the sentiment. Like when Tom Brady left the Patriots, like that in itself was kind of a win for Broncos country. It kind of felt like, all right, like maybe there's something good in this guy, that we get to see it. And then for him to go out and then beat the Chiefs. And I mean, it was great. It was great to see. He's become so much more likable now that he's not on the Patriots. And even when he was on the Patriots, I think like a lot of people still loved Tom Brady just because of who he was. And Broncos fans, we didn't really want to see it because he was beating our team a lot. And I think that's just kind of where it's at. I really like him now. I think he's great. I like listening to when he speaks, especially when he talks with, people like Peyton Manning or Drew Brees or whoever else. I just love listening to him talk. And, man, he has just such a wealth of experience and knowledge. I think it's worth Broncos country putting aside the differences that we've had in the past and really diving in full to being a Tom Brady fan at this point.
No, absolutely too. And I can see like a movie, right? We never got a sequel to Step Brothers, right? With Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. But could you imagine a Step Brother type spinoff with Peyton Manning, Eli Manning, and Tom Brady? Like Tom is now the new Step Brother. I just imagine it'd be a funny spoof there. But obviously, congratulations to Tom Brady on a very historic career. He and Peyton Manning headlined some of the greatest quarterback performances of all time. And Broncos country got to witness some of them. They got to see the Broncos overcome some of Tom Brady's heroic antics that he's been able to put on display in the past. And obviously, when we talk about football history, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, quarterback echelon there. Obviously, at the top of the game, they've changed the game from, I think, a very fundamental standpoint. They made the game better. And I hope that this new generation of quarterbacks, ladies and gentlemen, can help carry the torch the way that Peyton Manning and Tom Brady carried it from the generations before them. Football is such a fun game. It brings us all together, whether we have different rooting interests or whether we agree or disagree. One thing is for certain, we love the game. We love that it brings us all together. And we love that we get to bring ourselves together here with you, Broncos country, on Locked On Broncos, which you can get available free and everywhere you get your podcast. You can watch us here on YouTube. If you love today's show, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. If you're a brand new watcher or listener of the show, subscribe, follow, so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage of Broncos country. Once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Tomorrow's episode of the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about some Broncos coaching and staffing decisions that could be coming up, an interview with Clint Kubiak. What could that mean? Plus, we take a little bit of a look at the Senior Bowl and maybe some prospects the Broncos might have their eyes on. You get that and much more on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.